We begin in Ukraine, where at least 4 people have been killed in an overnight Russian barrage of drones and missiles. A 12-year-old girl was among the dead. The capital, Kyiv, was hit hardest, with weapons targeting civilian areas across the city. Officials say dozens more were injured.
The aftermath of a massive Russian strike on a Kyiv neighborhood. This 5-story residential building was among the targets hit. Windows blown out, cars damaged, people hurt.
There are no warehouses or power plants in this area. We thought we would be safe here, but they still hit us.
During the 12-hour assault, Russia also struck several other locations across Ukraine. Factories and residential buildings in Sumy and Odessa. In the southern city of Zaporizhia, residents had to be rescued from a burning building that was hit by Russian drones. Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, condemned the assault, calling Russia's strikes savage, deliberate terror.
This vile attack is exactly how Russia declares its true position. Moscow wants to keep fighting and killing, and it deserves the toughest pressure from the world.
Diplomatic efforts to stop the war have so far faltered, and Russia has vowed to press on with its offensive, leaving millions of Ukrainians vulnerable to the devastating consequences of this war.
Domitilla Sagramoso is a military and security analyst at King's College London. Domitilla, welcome. This was one of the fiercest Russian attacks on Ukraine, lasting some 12 hours. What is the Russian strategy behind such a massive bombardment?
Yes, it was a really tragic night for Ukrainians, and there are a variety of objectives that Russia is trying to achieve. On the one hand, it wants to obviously kind of demoralize the civilian population and send a sort of a political message to the leadership that this barrage is going to go on until Ukraine accepts the Russian conditions. Then also, of course, there is always an attempt to weaken or destroy, Ukrainian civilian or military infrastructure. We are talking about energy, railways, bridges, anything that can sort of hinder the Ukrainian economy and the capability also of the Ukrainian armed forces to operate. Also, we include, of course, in that sense, anything related to the military-industrial complex, but also any efforts as well, for example, to undermine the air defense system of Ukraine, to saturate the air defense system by sending these swarms of drones and missiles and making it very hard for Ukraine to sort of counter each one of them. And also, of course, to hit at logistics and any sort of mobilization efforts that the Ukrainians might be, carrying out. So really hit at the ability of Ukraine to carry out its military operations also on the front line. So there are a variety of elements there. But of course, the approach of the winter always involves hitting at, Ukrainian energy infrastructure to make it much harder for Ukrainians to, to live properly during the winter.
Of course, and we see that happening every year so far. But in that context of the air defence, how well would you say Ukraine's air defence is functioning?
Well, Ukrainian air defense systems have made amazing improvements if we compare to the beginnings of the war. I mean, they've developed very effective in many ways air defense systems in certain domains, and they are really very adaptive and very agile. If we think, for example, of drones, they've developed in the last year or so much more effective drone interceptors. They use a variety of elements from electronic warfare to drones themselves to helicopters. A variety of instruments also often involving, artificial intelligence. So that is, is sort of, we see there an area of significant improvement. Where we still find, where Ukrainians might be challenging is, of course, when we talk about hypersonic missiles or ballistic missiles, because there we would require, for example, much more support from Western countries with Patriot missiles and STAMP systems, which are more more effective against incoming missiles. There's also, for example, glide bombs are very hard to hit back, and those have been utilized this week, and they're often also utilized along the front lines. These are much harder to intercept. So it depends a lot, but Ukraine has really increased very much its ability to counter some of these attacks. But of course, the swarm of missiles and drones all together, they weaken significantly the Ukrainian air defense system. So really need to continue supporting them in that respect.
Yeah, and these attacks are increasing in recent months. We've been seeing them increase. Now, we also heard that during this Russian wave of attacks, jets were scrambled in neighbouring Poland. Why was that?
Well, I think since the events of a couple of weeks ago, when we saw that Russian drones penetrated the Polish airspace, not just Poland, but many countries along the borders of Ukraine and Russia and Belarus, they've really tried to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. So, that implies why we've seen this scrambling of Polish jets. But it seems from the photographs that I have seen that a lot of the attacks were primarily on the central and eastern parts of Ukraine. So these jets were not really involved, although there is a lot of talk now about creating what we call a sky shield over Western Ukraine, and we see a lot stronger collaboration between Ukrainian and Polish, military institutions and defense systems to make sure that we have a more cooperative and integrated air defense system. So that's a good step in the right direction. So these swarms of missiles by Russia into NATO territory might end up backfiring, because now we see a lot stronger collaboration between what we call the European drone wall, which was launched very recently, and Ukrainians have been asked to participate and collaborate. And all the experience and the expertise that the Ukrainians can provide is going to be very, very valuable for NATO member states.
Indeed. Military analyst Domitilla Sagramoso, thanks so much for your analysis.